Let's be real, the energy industry is under a microscope right now. The pressure to cut emissions is, well, it's immense. So what's the plan? We're going to take you inside a major industry conference to really get a look at the playbook they're building for this new era of accountability. Let's dive in.
All right, so first, let's set the scene. Who's actually in the room? Well, picture this. More than 200 people, all gathered in Houston. And we're not just talking about anyone. This is the heavy hitters. We've got operators, asset managers, data scientists, the heads of ESG from the biggest names in energy.
And on stage, 40 expert speakers. Now, this isn't just the industry talking to itself, right? You've got the EPA there. You've got giants like Chevron and Dow Chemical. And then you have these super innovative tech companies, all of them sharing the same microphone.
So you've got all these different people, from regulators to operators to tech gurus. But here's the thing that really stands out. All of them, every single one, is there for one single reason.
And that reason is to answer this one massive question. See, it's not about if companies should manage emissions anymore. That ship has sailed. The real question, the one everyone is wrestling with, is how? How do you do it in a way that's actually verifiable, that's efficient, and maybe even valuable? That's the nut they're all trying to crack.
Okay, so let's get into the first big theme. What's really driving all this? Because, it's not just about companies suddenly deciding to do the right thing. There's this huge external push that's forcing a whole new level of accountability.
And yeah, you guessed it, that push is coming from regulators. We're talking about new rules from the SEC, the EU's methane regulation, the EPA. These aren't suggestions anymore. They're hard and fast mandates. So companies are now scrambling to build reporting frameworks that can stand up to an audit. The pressure is, well, it's really on.
So if the regulations are the big why this is all happening, then the data, that's the how. And honestly, this is where things get really tricky. This was probably the biggest hurdle talked about at the entire conference, just getting the data right.
The industry has a term for its goal here, MRV. It stands for monitoring, reporting, and verification. Basically, it's this idea of creating a gold standard for emissions data. The dream is to have a system that's so reliable, so transparent, that nobody can question the numbers. Okay, but here comes the reality check. A presentation from Dwayne Purvis of Purvis Energy Advisors really brought this home. He showed this case study from Texas where there's this huge gap, a massive disconnect between what companies are reporting and what scientists are actually measuring in the atmosphere.
So what's going on here? How can that be?
Well, it turns out the regulations in Texas actually allow for small volumes of gas to be emitted without any measurement at all. And while each one might be tiny, when you add them all up, you get a huge data gap. It's a classic case of death by a thousand cuts, creating this big difference between what's on paper and what's in the air.
And look, that's just the stuff you're directly responsible for, your own emissions. But what about all the emissions you don't directly control? That question, man, it opens up a whole other can of worms, and it was a massive topic of conversation.
This is what everyone calls the Scope 3 problem. We're talking about emissions from your entire value chain. So not just your facilities, but your suppliers, the trucks that move your product, even your customers using it. Trying to track that, it requires a whole new level of teamwork and transparency. You literally have to get everyone you work with on board to get good data. All right, so the challenge is pretty clear, right? You've got intense pressure from regulators and this gigantic data problem. So what are the solutions? Well, the conference was basically a showcase for this incredible high-tech toolkit that's being built to tackle these exact issues. First up, you've got AI, artificial intelligence. And look, this isn't some far-off sci-fi thing anymore. Companies are using it right now to comb through tons of operational data and figure out the root cause of problems automatically. But the real game changer? It's moving from just reacting to stuff that breaks to actually predicting it before it happens.
Then there's this really cool concept, digital twins. Seriously, the best way to think about it is like a super detailed video game version of an entire operation, like an oil field. Operators can run simulations on this virtual copy, testing out different strategies to cut emissions without any of the real-world cost or risk. It's a way to de-risk these huge multi-million-dollar decisions and find the best path forward, all on a computer screen.
Of course, for all these fancy models like AI and digital twins to work, they need good data to eat, right? And that's where next-gen sensors come into the picture.
We're talking about networks of sensors that give you a constant 24/7 view of what's going on. Think about it like this. It's the difference between taking a few random photos and watching a continuous high-def movie of your emissions. And finally, how do you make sure all this data is totally trustworthy? Well, some folks are looking at blockchain. The whole idea is to create this transparent, tamper-proof digital record, like a public ledger for emissions data. It would build this unbreakable chain of trust that regulators, investors, anyone could verify.
But you know what? The tech is only half the story. Maybe the biggest, most important shift that people talked about at the conference wasn't about hardware or software at all. It was about a change in mindset. It's this move away from just, ticking a box to stay out of trouble. This is the real pivot. Instead of seeing emissions as just a cost, something you have to spend money on, leaders are starting to see it as a potential value driver. What used to be just a regulatory headache is now being looked at as a strategic opportunity. It's a complete flip from obligation to advantage. So, how do you actually do that?
Well, it happens when you start building real business cases that connect cutting emissions to bottom-line benefits. We're talking about things like better operational efficiency, because hey, leaking gas is leaking product. We're talking about a reputation, and even finding new ways to make money from stuff that used to just be considered waste.
Okay, so you've got the tech, you've got the new strategy, but none of it works without people. And that was the final crucial theme here. This whole energy transition, at its core, is a human one. It's all about skills and it's all about collaboration.
There was a ton of talk about building what they called a carbon-competent workforce. And what that means is, first, figuring out what skills people are going to need in this new reality. Then you've got to create the training to get them there, but maybe most important of all, you have to empower your employees to be part of the solution, to be agents of change, not just people following a new set of rules.
This quote here from Brandy Fernandez at Baker Hughes, it just nails it. The idea that solving these massive challenges is not a solo sport. No single company can do it alone. It's all about building relationships, creating partnerships, sharing what works, and even learning from what doesn't.
So all of this leaves us with one big final question. You've got the push from regulators, you've got this amazing new toolkit of technology, you have this big strategic shift happening. All the pieces of the puzzle seem to be falling into place. So the question isn't really what needs to be done anymore. The real question is, can the industry actually pull it off at the speed and scale that's needed? Are we looking at a genuine turning point right now?